Hi, my name is John Lupton. I'm the historian for the Illinois Supreme Court, and I'm here to give you a tour of the Supreme Court building today. First, I wanted to start on the outside where we can see the architecture of the building. And what you see is this is a Beaux-Arts architecture style. Beaux-Arts is basically classical revival on steroids. The building was designed by Carby Zimmerman, who was the state architect at the time, and it cost about $450,000 to build. Also behind me you see two statues at the front of the entrance. Those were done by Charles Mulligan, who is an Irish immigrant. He did a number of sculptures around Chicago. He's most famous for the Vicksburg Memorial in Vicksburg National Battlefield site. And the statues here represent justice and power and law and knowledge. Welcome to the Illinois Supreme Court courtroom. This is where the justices do their work, sitting on the bench. Let me first quickly tell you how a case gets to the Illinois Supreme Court. In Illinois, we have a three-tiered court system. The circuit court is the trial level court, which is where 99.9% of the cases begin and end. And there is where you'll have a trial, one judge, sometimes jurors, and then they'll make a decision in a case, whether it's a divorce case, a debt case, or speeding ticket, anything like that. If you happen to lose your case, you can take that case on appeal to the Illinois Appellate Court. The Appellate Court has three justices, and they don't do a retrial of the case. Basically, what they're doing is examining if there were any errors made at the circuit level. And then the three justices will make a decision, issue an opinion, whether there was an error at the circuit level or not. If there was an error, then the case usually goes back for retrial. If not, then the circuit court decision stands. Now, if you lose your case at the appellate court level, you have the opportunity to appeal to the Supreme Court. And at the Supreme Court, they pick and choose their cases. Let me back up a second and say at the circuit court level, there's about 3 million new cases that are filed each year. At the appellate level, there's about 6,000 new cases per year. And the Supreme Court handles about 2,000 new cases per year. But as I said, they pick and choose their cases, so they only hear oral arguments in about 80 of those cases each year. Now, those cases are spread out over 5 terms. The court meets for 2 weeks in January, March, May, September, and November, hearing cases that they've decided that they feel are important enough to hear. So why does the court choose particular cases and not others? Well, generally, it's because of one, it might be the general importance of the case. 2, there might be a discrepancy between appellate courts throughout the state. We have 5 appellate courts, 1 Supreme Court, and 102 circuit courts. So if there's a disagreement in the appellate court, the Supreme Court will then hear to decide which side was correct. They also hear constitutional issues, and those are directly appealed from the circuit court to the Supreme Court. And a constitutional issue may be a circuit judge has declared a law to be unconstitutional. That will automatically come to the Supreme Court. And then lastly, the Supreme Court picks cases because it might be a completely new issue. With all of the new technology, social media and things like that, there have been a number of new cases that have come to the Supreme Court about technological issues. Now you can see on the bench there are 7 seats. So the Supreme Court has 7 members. And in Illinois, we have a geographical representative Supreme Court. We're the only state in the country that does it this way. So we have justices, we have 3 from Cook County. We have 1 each from Northern Illinois, North Central Illinois, Central Illinois, and Southern Illinois. And the justices are elected in partisan elections for 10-year terms. And so you have to run either as a Democrat or a Republican. And then you, once you're elected to that seat, you serve for a 10-year term. And then after the 10 years, you run for what's called retention. And in a retention race, you're not running against anyone. It's just a yes or no question on the ballot. And you have to get 60% of the yes votes in order to be retained in office. We have a Chief Justice who always sits in the middle, and then the justices sit by tenure, going from their right to left. So the longest tenured justice will be sitting on his right, and then it staggers all the way to the end. And since we have court portraits dating back to the 1930s, we can easily date those portraits based on where the justices are sitting. So that's the operation of the court in effect. One thing about the Supreme Court building is that even though it's a working building, we like to interpret it as a legal history art museum because of the many, many pieces of art that are in here. So I want to point out some of the murals that we have here. These murals were done by Albert Crable in 1910. He studied art in Paris, returned to the United States, and began a long teaching career at the Chicago Art Institute. And he came up with the plan for the murals. There are 14 murals in the Supreme Court building. Most of them here. There are 2 others in another courtroom that we'll see later. But each of the walls basically have a different theme. So the wall that you're looking at right now is the continuity of the law, which kind of gives the history of the court and how it progressed through time. On the south wall here, there are 4 murals that are all similarly designed that are the function of the law. And so you'll see different representations of what the law is and what it does for people. And then on the east wall, what you see is the attributes of the law. And so those are represented by genii, which are these little kid-like creatures who, again, kind of talk about different attributes of the law. So the last thing I want to point out is the Latin phrase. So when you're on the bench of the court, the 7 justices are the only ones that can see this Latin phrase that's on the back of the wall here. And that Latin phrase is audi alterum partem, which means hear the other side. So as the court is listening to oral arguments in cases, they are seeing that Latin phrase that basically is telling them to listen to both sides of the argument and then make a determination on which side fits the law the best. Behind the Supreme Court room is the attorney's room, and this is where the attorneys will prepare for their arguments before they go in before the Illinois Supreme Court to argue their case. They'll do their preparations here, go through their notes one last time before they actually argue their cases before the court. There's a monitor in here where they can watch what's going on in the argument previous, so they can see kind of the line of questioning that the attorneys might be getting in those particular cases. So that's the function of this room. But what we like to do in here is we like to interpret this as a history of all of the justices who have sat on the Supreme Court since 1818, which is when Illinois became a state. So in the very first corner up here, you see we don't have a portrait for our very first Chief Justice, Joseph Phillips, but the chronology goes around the very top of the room, and then it drops down and then continues to go around again. There's a couple of prominent justices that I do want to point out in here. One of them over on this wall is Stephen Douglas, and he is the second from the left in the very top row. And Stephen Douglas, who was a very prominent figure in antebellum Illinois politics, a lot has actually been mentioned about him recently because his statue was removed in front of the Capitol building because of his ties to slavery. So there's been kind of a reckoning of some of these antebellum people who had slaves. Douglas didn't technically own slaves, his wife did, but there are a number of these early Supreme Court justices who actually did own slaves, and that continued, obviously, at least through the first few decades of Illinois statehood. There's a couple of other people I want to point out. You'll notice that the group of people here is very homogeneous. They're pretty much all white males. except we have two justices right here. Marianne McMurrow, who was our first woman on the Illinois Supreme Court. She was elected in 1992, and she became the first woman Chief Justice in 2002. And at that time, she was the first woman to ever lead a branch of Illinois government. And then just to her left, a couple down, is Charles Freeman, who was our first African American on the Illinois Supreme Court. He was elected in 1990, and he served for 27 years before he retired in 2018. Across the hall from the Illinois Supreme Court courtroom is the former appellate courtroom. Now the courtroom is used as a just a staging ground or an honorary courtroom. It's not really used as a courtroom anymore. The appellate court met here from the time the building opened, which is 1908, until 2001, when they moved into their own building across the street. So the appellate court no longer has a function in this building anymore. So we interpret this room, as you can see, it's quite a bit different than the Illinois Supreme Court room. It's got tapestry, the wood is mahogany in here as opposed to the walnut in the Supreme Court room. So it's a completely different kind of architecture in here, but it really blends well together. So on the back here, you see a couple of more these murals by Albert Crable. This one on the back talks about, it's basically representing everyone who has access to the law. And so you see different, again, different representations of a widow, a newly married couple, a college professor, a laborer, a priest, and they all have equal justice under law. And the Thomas Jefferson quote stands at the top there to remind people of that. Above is one of the ceiling murals here, and this represents all of the old types of law that came together to form our common law system in Illinois. So you have civil law, which is represented by Justinian, canon law, which is represented by Pope Gregory, Mosaic law, which is represented by Moses. So you have these different representations here of how the law comes together in Illinois. Behind the bench, we see Albert Crable's competition piece. And by competition piece, what I mean is that this was the portrait or the painting that he submitted to win the competition to do all of the murals in this building. And it's very similar to one of the paintings that is in the Supreme Court room, right above the Audi Alterum Partum phrase. And this is a precedent, justice, and record. So this painting was given to the court in 2009, and the Crable grandchildren donated it to the court. They actually had it in a basement and where it had been for dozens of years. And they thought that it would be better suited to remain here in the Supreme Court building. So we're very glad to have this piece here. Down the hallway from the Supreme Court room and the appellate court room is the Supreme Court Law Library. And the library houses about 250,000 volumes that date back to the 1600s. Not all of the volumes are in this room. Some of them are at an off-storage site, but they are easily retrievable for anyone who might need them. The law library, again, has a different theme than a lot of the other rooms. You can see that on the columns, it's done in silver leaf rather than gold leaf, which is what most of the other rooms are. And also what you'll see is different murals in here. These were done by Edgar Cameron Spire, who was an artist at the same time as Albert Crable. The idea, or the belief is that Crable won the award, but Spire believed that he should have gotten it, but he kind of assumed that someone from the Art Institute would get it, which was Crable. So the idea is that this might have been an olive leaf for the artist to do the four portraits in here. which are, just as representative as the others, and also blend in really well with this room. So if we look over here, we'll see some old law books. Now, the Supreme Court Law Library has been in existence since 1842, and that actually means that some of these old law books would have been used by Abraham Lincoln when he was a practicing lawyer in Springfield, and he had a large practice, upwards of 400 cases before the Illinois Supreme Court. So the fact that Lincoln actually used some of these law books, gives you a tactile connection to Abraham Lincoln when he was a lawyer in Springfield. In the hallway of the Supreme Court building are portraits of the Chief Justices. And this was a tradition that dates back to the 1960s when we started to do oil portraits for all of our chiefs. A Chief Justice in Illinois serves for 3 years and is chosen by his colleagues on the bench. And generally the pattern has been that the longest tenured justice who has not yet been chief becomes the next chief. So these oil paintings just represents the history of the head of the judicial branch in general. Now here I want to point out Justice Robert Thomas, who just recently retired from the court. But Thomas was actually more famous for being the kicker for the Chicago Bears in the 1970s and 1980s. He played for Notre Dame on their national championship team in 1974, and then went on to a long pro career with the Bears, the Vikings, and the Lions. So this is his portrait, and then again we have portraits of many others here who have been chief up to the present day.